pile on over time. You hope that they grow with the market. They're completely at the whim of the market, right? If the market goes up, they go up. If the market goes down, they go down. But if you think about a traditional 401k or IRA, those vehicles don't cut you monthly checks. Does that make sense? So they sit in an account and you grow it, and then it just sits there until you're ready to retire. And then when retirement comes, what do? You begin to pull money out of the account. And so you build this really big balance. Hopefully it's a big balance. And then you deplete your way all the way to death, right? You deplete your way to death. I mean, how fun does that sound? You build this account, and it doesn't cut you checks on a regular basis. It's just I'm going to spend down what I've accumulated and what I've earned. And it may not leave you or your loved ones with a lot. Now, real estate is quite a bit different in that when you take an asset, whether that's your down payment money or a few down payments, and you invest it into real estate, that real estate can grow over time. As far as an asset, it can grow in value. And while you're accumulating value with your real estate, if real estate's done right, what does real estate have the ability to do for you every single month? Cuts a check, right? Which makes it quite a bit different. You still might be building an account balance. We'll air quote that, account balance, because it could just be a net worth that's growing with your real estate. But while that's happening, you're getting checks that you can spend every single month. So that's one reason we really like real estate. I often think of it like this. Imagine taking 30 years to build your dream home, and you build it board by board, brick by brick. You're the one out there hammering every single nail, and it takes you 30 years to build this home. Once the home is completed and you're ready to live in it, you start to rip it apart, board by board, brick by brick. No one would do that in their right mind, yet financially, it's what a lot of us have kind of been trained and taught to do when we look at traditional retirement vehicles. So that's one reason we really like real estate. Another reason, real estate allows you to buy with leverage. Now, what we mean by this, and those of you listening online, what we're talking about is if you look at money into a 401k or an IRA or any other asset class, it's literally dollars in and you buy the amount of that asset that you want. So you could invest $50,000 in mutual funds and you're going to get $50,000 worth of mutual funds, and then you hope that those are going to grow over time. Real estate, however, allows you to use leverage. So we always hear that word leverage. What are we really talking about? It's this. You can take, instead of $50,000 to buy $50,000 worth of mutual funds, you could take $50,000 and potentially purchase a $200,000 or $220,000 home. That $50,000 is your down payment. So you're putting in less and you're still getting an asset that can also generate cash flow and has the ability to grow over time. Does that make sense? So real estate's one of the few things that allows us to utilize leverage, meaning we're getting more for our dollar, and then we are still generating cash flows if we do it right on a monthly basis. Another reason we really like real estate, and we're going to be talking more about tax benefits tonight. Mark's going to give us all kinds of good stuff on how we can utilize a instrumental tool in growing your real estate portfolio, 1031 exchanges, so that you could defer some taxes. But real estate allows you to have multiple profit centers, whether that's tax benefits, whether that's cash flow, whether that's appreciation. It's really rare that money goes into an asset class and then that asset class produces money for you in a variety of ways. So if we go back to our mutual funds example, $50,000 goes into the mutual fund. Into the mutual funds, we own $50,000 of mutual funds, and then how can we make money? There's one way, right? What's the one way we can make money if we have money in mutual funds? The market has to go up, right? So we're dependent on the market. That's the way we make money with mutual funds. Now with real estate, we're able to utilize leverage, so we're getting more for less dollars, and it's generating cash flow. And if you have the opportunity to take advantage of some appreciation as the market increases or grows, you're seeing some growth there, and you're getting tax benefits to boot. So again, real estate gives us the ability not only to generate cash flow, not only to use leverage, but then also we can generate multiple profit centers inside of a singular investment. It's really rare to find that. There's only one or two things that really allow you to do that, and real estate is one of those, okay? So that's another reason we really like real estate. And finally, we like to talk about this one. Real estate acts as a hedge against inflation. So I was looking up, so I grew up in California, in the Bay Area, and my parents live in the same home that they've lived in for 40 years, Let me think. Maybe more than that now. More than that, because they bought their home in 1971 in San Leandro, California, and they bought it for $41,000. So I just checked Zillow on their home just the other day, and it's now worth $675,000. Okay, that's not too bad. Now, it's taken a long time, but they purchased a home with $41,000. They never refinanced it. They just had that one mortgage ever. But what happened is, as prices became more expensive, as milk became more expensive, as everything started to increase, they've been able to have this asset that has grown and essentially acted as a hedge against inflation. They need a lot more to be able to retire today than if they had retired in 1971. Does that make sense? In terms of what they would need on an annual basis to maintain their current standard of living. 2018 is far more expensive than 1971. Well, they have this asset that has grown over that time that has acted as a hedge against inflation. It's another reason why we like real estate, because real estate gives us the ability to have a type of physical, tangible hedge against inflation. So why do we use real estate? Because it gives us cash flow. It gives us the ability to leverage. It gives us the ability to generate multiple profit centers inside of a singular investment, and it can act as a hedge against inflation. This is why we started the company. It was to help folks just like you be able to transact real estate and take advantage of all of these benefits. And how cool is it that when you work with a company that can do a lot of the hard stuff and heavy lifting for you, you can experience all those benefits without necessarily having to experience all of the headache that you would have to experience on your own. And I wanted to just talk about that briefly. You know, if you think about going and doing real estate on your own, and everybody in this room knows this, but there may be some of you who are seeing us for the first time, and if you think about everything that goes in to you doing real estate on your own, I just want you to consider it, right? What type of real estate are you going to do? Which market are you going to go to? What price point do you want to purchase at? Are you going to purchase with a mortgage? Or are you going to purchase cash? Are you going to purchase in an IRA? Are you going to flip? Are you going to use somebody else's money? Are you going to be a wholesaler? Are you going to do lease options or sandwich leases? Or what type of real? Are you going to chase foreclosures? Are you going to put up yellow signs all over the city and say, I'll buy your house cash, and then you have to navigate that world? How are you going to invest in real estate? Which market are you going to invest in? Then assuming you can find the deal, you go through the process of doing the research, of finding the right team that can help you get it purchased and help you make it profitable. If you're doing rehab on a property, you have to consider, what am I going to do? How much? Imagine buying real estate in a state you don't live in and trying to figure out what's the right home to buy, what the right price point is, what type of rehab needs to be done, finding the right type of tenant, and then managing that tenant long term. Could be difficult. So you have the choice to do all of those things on your own, or you come and work with a company like Done For You, where we get to make you kind of the hero of your own financial story. And we guide you through the process because we can assist with the finding of the real estate in the best markets in the country that can allow you to take advantage of all those benefits and all those reasons we like real estate, that can help you get that property fixed up, that can help you get it financed so that you can use the leverage we talked about earlier, and that can get it leased and managed over time, and even have the ability to have somebody like Nathan, who you'll hear from in a second, give you a call, or Kurt, give you a call and say, hey, it might be time to sell, and it might be time to multiply your portfolio. That is ultimately what Done For You is about. It's about removing all of the headache, and it's about creating a system that can increase predictability. I always like to say we like systems because systems increase predictability. Predictability minimizes or mitigates risk, which has the ability to maximize your potential return. And so Done For You is the system that allows that to happen, so you don't have to go through all of this business, which makes you ornery and angry and probably generally miserable to be around, or you let a team that knows what they're doing help you every step of the way. Now, I wanted to give you just a quick example for those of you who don't really know how a game plan works. I wanted to just talk about it because if you go to the website, if you go to dfy-realestate.com, all over the website, you're going to see calls to action that say, hey, come and get a game plan. Have a conversation with us. Let's talk. Let's do a needs audit. Let's have an exploratory or a discovery phone call. Let's see where you're at and where you need to go. And then ultimately, you're going to have a conversation that's going to work a little bit like this. We're going to find out where you're at and where you're wanting to go. And maybe you say, you know what, I have, $39,000 or $40,000 that I want to invest in real estate. And you may find out that you might have the opportunity to buy a home in one of our markets, like Indianapolis. That's a little bit more less expensive market. And you may put 20% down into a home. So now how does that home begin to replace your income over time? Well, it's not going to replace all your work income right away. And I want to make sure that you understand that cash flow begins to be generated, but it doesn't mean that you're financially free immediately. It takes time. And the beauty of having a game plan or having a real estate retirement plan or a retirement plan with real estate at the core is the idea of what are the steps that I need to take so that over time I can begin to replace my income one investment property at a time. So you may see accumulation in cash flow that's generating. You may be accumulating the cash flow. You may see appreciation potentially in the property, and you may ride this pony for 6 or 7 or 10 years. But then what if your property's increased enough in equity and you've been smart with your money and saved your cash flow that you have the ability to utilize something like you'll hear about here in just a moment, a 1031 exchange, and take that one home and turn it into 2. Now, I want to be really clear because the way that we like to interact with the game plan is we want to know what are the assets that you have available to begin investing in real estate right now. It's not necessarily, it may be for some people, but it's not necessarily, hey, call us when you have $200,000. Before then, please don't pick up the phone. We don't want to have anything to do with you. It's a where are you at, where are you trying to go, and how do we get you from here to there? So if you have some assets that you can utilize that can be moved into a property, if you have good credit, if you have verifiable income, and we have the ability to begin this process by taking some time and letting that process play out, you may be able to take that one single batch of capital and now over a number of years, turn that one batch of capital into 2 homes. The one batch of capital bought home number 1, but if you do real estate the right way, that one home could turn into 2. Now you have more cash flow, you have double the homes, double the potential for appreciation, double the tax benefits, and if you continue to utilize a vehicle like you're going to hear about tonight, you may be maybe just 5 years down the road able to turn your 2 homes into 3. And maybe in another 5 years, you could turn those 3 homes into 4. And now, yeah, maybe it took you 20 years, but imagine if you started with what you had today, you didn't have to invest anything extra into the overall process, and you're able, within 15 or 20 years, to begin replacing a significant chunk of your work income so you're not reliant on a market asset that has to grow, that you have to deplete in order to live. But you have a series of assets that could generate cash flow. Now, just to give you an idea of what that scenario that I just showed you would play out like, look, this is what your work income might be if you're making around $60,000. You go buy one home. It's not a ton of cash flow. But over time, as your real estate portfolio multiplies, look, with the scenario I just demonstrated, within about 20 years, you've almost completely replaced your work income. Now, that's good news. If you're 45 and you're starting this process, you might have your income completely replaced, assuming inflation and assuming all of the factors that would go into what your income would need to be over time. That real estate might be able to replace that income completely. Now, what if you're like one of our, I would say, more traditional clients, and you have more assets to work with, and you can come out the gate and maybe you buy 2 or 3 investment properties, but maybe you also make close to $150,000. The first scenario, this is somebody making around 60. This is somebody making around 150. You'll notice the numbers change. They have a few more assets to work with up front, but again, over time, real estate and your real estate portfolio begins to expand, and it gives you the ability to begin replacing your income initially and then maybe eventually all the way, okay? This is why we love real estate. And what I just showed you in that kind of really brief overview example of a game plan is this idea that you start where you are with what you have and you begin. And you begin utilizing all those things we like about real estate to buy. Maybe it's just one property to start with. And then you utilize a project manager, somebody like Nathan Larson, who can work with you, hold your hand step by step over the years to begin to multiply that portfolio, increase your cash flow, increase all the benefits that come from owning real estate so that you can ultimately redefine that long-term retirement and replace that income utilizing real estate. Now, in that game plan I showed you, we were talking about 1 turning into 2, 2 turning into 3. One of the most powerful vehicles that will allow you to do that is something called a 1031 exchange. And in just a moment, we're going to have literally one of the nation's, if not the nation's, most premier expert in 1031 exchanges here to share with you how it works, how this thing, you are one of the, I'm assuming, I mean, I know how much you've done in 1031 exchange, so I'm just assuming you're one of the nation's, I'm going to call you one of the nation's best. I know you are. But you're going to hear about how this works. Now, the most important thing that I want you to take away from the little discussion we had here is perhaps real estate can allow you to redefine your retirement and view your future differently. You're not going to know until you have a chance to interact with somebody who can look at your scenario and begin to help you take the right steps, which is why we always encourage everybody. If you're an existing client, we encourage you to get an updated game plan. You can do that by visiting our website, dfy-realestate.com. Our phone number's on there. You can click a button. You can schedule a time. You can have us call you. It's very easy. And for those of you joining us for the first time who've never had the opportunity to have sort of an exploratory or discovery call or a needs audit or a game plan for you, feel free to click on that button. It's totally free. It's really painless, and it's really powerful. And it could truly give you the ability to completely redefine your future starting today. And that's really what it's all about. So I'm going to welcome up Nathan Larson, who's one of our incredible project managers. You want to come up, Nate? So how many of you have had a chance to work with Nate? Anybody here have Nate as a coach? Okay. He's amazing, and he knows his stuff. He has an incredible background, and he works very closely with Mark, and I'm going to let him introduce Mark, and then Mark's going to come up and share some incredible information with you about the 1031 exchange. So put your hands together for Nathan Larson, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks. Well, I am really excited. Actually, can we have Mark just come up here? So, as a project manager, you know, I spend my time helping clients to hopefully succeed in real estate, which they actually do. We do a pretty good job about that. I'll brag about that. But you know, when I sit in my desk and in my chair and I'm helping you as a client try to expand that portfolio, you know, we have our teams in our different markets, and they're great. And whether that's rehab teams or, you know, property managers or real estate agents and suppliers, I mean, we rely on those people so much. But when it comes time to do a property review with a client, and it's time to sell and take the gains from those properties and start buying, you know, those 2 properties from the sale of 1 and so forth, we really have to rely on a strong team to utilize that 1031 exchange to take advantage of that deferment of the capital gains. And so I think I don't know how many years it's been, 2, 3, 4 years or something since.
I think it's been a lot longer than that.
Has
I think
it?
it's been probably 8 to 10 years ago.
So, yeah, I've only worked for the company for 7, but no. We've worked with Mark for quite a long time now. And I had him down a long time ago to train my team and the project managers on 1031s. And since that point, it's just been a great relationship. So as I'm sitting at my desk and working with a client and they're ready to start selling a property and they need to get a 1031 in place, I usually just pick up the phone and do a conference call and introduce them to Mark and his team, basically. And Mark's going to go over 1031 stuff, and it gets complicated. He's an attorney, and he loves that stuff. But the thing that I love about his company is when he is helping our clients, their team just makes it simple to go through, and he makes it simple for me to help you with that as well. And they just do a fabulous job. And I've referred hundreds and hundreds of our clients over to Mark and his team for 1031 services, and I've not had a complaint from any of our clients from his team and the services that they provide. So maybe just a little bit about Mark. Mark has been with First American Exchange, which is a national company, but he is actually the lead counsel and manager of the Salt Lake office, which is just local here. And, oh, sorry, I need to put the mic up. And let's see, he has done over 20,000, he and his team have done over 20,000 or approximately 20,000 exchanges since he's been there since 2005. Is that right? Yep. So that's a lot of experience. And I'll brag for him, the largest exchange that he's actually done has been over $1.5 billion, which I can't even fathom that. And I mean, it sometimes gets a little complicated trying to juggle time frames and dollar amounts and properties that you're exchanging into just on our small scale with what we do with our clients, but 1.5 billion that's a big exchange. And so he has a plethora of experience, and I've relied on Mark for odds and ends and kind of out there questions for different circumstances that our clients, fall into. And Mark has been so gracious and so helpful to really help us. And so I'm not going to talk anymore because this is the star of the show today, but I'm really grateful. I know Mark took time out of his night and away from family and soccer games potentially to be here with us. And so we are really, really grateful for Mark. But we'll turn the time over, Mark, and if we could just give him a round of applause to get started.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. DFY has been very good to me over the years. I guess it maybe has only been 6 or 7 years since we met, but honestly, when we met back 6 or 7 years ago, the real estate market was not very good. It was very sad. And during that time frame, 1031 exchanges were not very popular. Foreclosure, short sales, those kinds of things were very popular. In 2018, foreclosures and short sales are kind of gone by the wayside, and here we are. When you sell a property, a 1031 exchange is a very valuable tool to be aware of. So today, what we're going to come away with today is, well, maybe CE credit isn't important to you guys, but 1031 knowledge. As a real estate investor, you can make money in a bad market, and you can make money in a good market. In a good market, if you're selling property, obviously you want to know what a 1031 exchange is. And another important thing is, why would you want to use my company versus another company? So another thing we're going to come away with today is why First American. First American is a large company, the company that I work for, and we'll talk about that. What is a 1031 exchange? We have a very complicated definition of a 1031 exchange in the code. I've paraphrased it here. Basically, a 1031 exchange is a swap of business or investment property for another piece of business or investment property. And if you do it correctly, through the 1031 exchange process, you're not paying any taxes. Okay, some common misconceptions. 1031 exchanges are not new. They've been around for a really long time, but they've just become very popular in the last 20 years. 1031 exchange like kind doesn't necessarily mean similar use or service. So we get a lot of calls from clients. They'll call up and say, look, I'm selling a condo. Does that mean I have to buy another condo? No, you can buy, like kind is very broad in the real estate world. So you can sell a condo and buy a single family residence. You can sell a single family residence and buy an apartment complex. It's very interchangeable for 1031 exchanges. 1031 exchanges are not just for large investments. Although, like Nate said, we have done an exchange for a transaction in excess of $1 billion. But a lot of our exchanges are for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. So don't be bashful in calling us if you have a $200,000 transaction. We'd love to work with you guys. So, and the cost to complete a 1031 exchange, most of our transactions for a regular forward exchange range from $695 up to a little over $1,000 for one sale and for one purchase. Okay, the benefits of a 1031 exchange. Obviously, when you're selling property and you have taxes that you owe, the biggest benefit of a 1031 is you're not paying any taxes. There are some other hidden benefits that maybe some people aren't aware of. Number 2 up here is a greater buying power or leverage. In other words, if you're selling a property and you're not giving money to the IRS, that means you have more money in your pocket to go out and buy your next property. If you've got more money to buy your next property, that's a better down payment. It means you can buy a better, more expensive property. Increase income cash flow. So if you have a property like a farm, great property, but a farm doesn't really generate any income, and you want to sell that farm and you want to go into a property like an apartment complex or a condo or a single family residence where you can rent those properties out and generate income, you can do a 1031 and sell that farm and go into a property that generates rents for you. What about management relief? Sometimes you have a property as a real estate investor, and as you get older, maybe you get tired of fixing toilets and leaky faucets. You can sell a property that has a high management relief, you can sell a property where you're having to manage that property a lot, fix a lot of toilets, repair carpet, etc. You can go out of that property in a 1031 and go into a property where there's not a lot of management. Diversification or consolidation. You can have a situation where you're selling a bunch of properties in a 1031 and go into one larger property, or you can sell one larger property and go into a bunch of smaller ones through the 1031 program. Relocation or expansion of business. So what if you live in California and you have a bunch of rental property in Southern California and you're moving to Utah, and as a real estate investor, a lot of real estate investors like to be close to their property. Some don't, but some do. You can move out of California, move to Utah, sell all your stuff in California on a 1031 exchange, and then swap it for property in Utah. The 1031 exchange program is a federal statute, meaning you can cross state lines. You can do 1031 exchanges in any of the 50 states. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Okay. All right. When to suggest doing a 1031 exchange? Well, as a real estate investor, you should be thinking about doing a 1031 exchange anytime you sell a property that you don't live in it. If it's your primary residence, not a good property for a 1031, but if it's a property that you don't live in, you should at least consider doing a 1031 exchange, meaning call us and we can kind of talk to you about whether it makes sense to do a 1031, or you can call your CPA, or you can call someone like DFY. And they can assist you with that process. When is it too late to set up a 1031 exchange? So in our industry, I get a lot of calls from clients where, title companies or clients that will call us and say, look, we've closed on a property 3 days ago, and the money is just sitting with the title company. We haven't touched the money yet. The money is just still sitting with the title company. So what happens if you've closed and the money's just sitting with the title company? Is it too late to set up a 1031 exchange? Got a lot of people nodding their heads. Yes. Unfortunately, we are in the business of setting up exchanges, and we want to set up that exchange for you, but if it's already closed, even if you haven't touched the money yet, it's too late to set up the 1031 exchange. And so, make sure if you have a property that you don't live in, make sure you call us or DFY or call a CPA and talk about whether a 1031 exchange is something that's beneficial for you. And if it is, get it set up before closing. Once it closes, it's too late. But if you're sitting at the closing table, and you're getting ready to sign the settlement statement and all the documents related to closing, it's not too late to set up the exchange at that point. So don't be bashful. Give us a call. It takes us 15 to 20 minutes to set up the exchange. And so we'll get those documents over to the title company, we'll email those documents over, and we can still get the exchange set up if you're sitting at the closing table. Once it closes and you've left the title company, it's too late. Okay. If you're doing an exchange, if you're selling a property and you want to do a 1031 exchange, it's very important to tell your realtor that you need some 1031 cooperation language in your contract. So we're talking about the contract for the property that you're selling, and we're talking about the contract for the property that you're purchasing. It's very basic language. A lot of realtors will have access to this language through the Board of Realtors. They can just get a 1031 addendum where it notifies all the parties to the transaction that the seller, if you're the seller, or the buyer, if you're the buyer, is doing a 1031 exchange. So make sure if you're doing a 1031 exchange, you have 1031 cooperation language in your contract. And of course, if you're not working with a realtor, or if your realtor doesn't have access to that language, call us and we will email you that language for your contract. Okay, capital gains. What is a capital gain? Anytime you sell something, whether it's a baseball card, whether it's a piece of artwork, or a piece of real estate, anytime you sell something for more than you paid for it, then you're going to have a capital gain. The difference is a capital gain, and you're going to pay taxes on that. So the concept of capital gains. So let's take a very basic example. You bought a property for $100,000, and on a 1031, your adjusted cost is basically what you bought the property for, plus any capital improvements that you made to the property during your ownership, less depreciation. So you bought a property for $100,000. Your adjusted cost is $100,000 because you didn't put anything into it. You sell a property for $200,000, and the difference is going to be $100,000, and that's your capital gain. By the way, if you guys have any questions, you can certainly ask me. Okay. Capital gains taxes and depreciation recapture. Okay, so let's assume you have a piece of real estate and you're selling it and you're not doing a 1031 exchange. So if you're not doing an exchange, you're paying taxes, right? Well, the first round of taxes that you're going to pay, if you're not doing an exchange, are federal taxes. On the federal level, if you're selling a property and you didn't own that property for at least a year, then the tax rate that you'll pay is your ordinary income tax rate. So whatever tax bracket you're in, that's the tax you're going to pay on your capital gains. If you've owned the property for at least 1 year and a day or more, then you're in the capital gains rates, which are 15% for most people. If you make more than $400,000 as an individual or $450,000 as a married couple, then your capital gain rate is 20%.
Hey, Mark. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Our lapel mic isn't working too well. So can we just have you speak into that?
Absolutely. Is this working?
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. Okay, so going back to this, if you've owned the property for less than a year, you're paying ordinary income tax. If you've owned the property for 1 year and a day or more, it's it's 20%. Sorry, it's 15% for most individuals, 20% if you make more than $400,000 or $450,000 as a married couple. If you make more than $200,000 as an individual or $250,000 as a married couple, then there's also a 3.8% Medicare tax that the federal government is going to sneak into your real estate transaction. So this is another round of taxes that you'll have to pay. So we talked about that. So you're going to pay federal taxes. You're going to pay the sneaky 3.8% Medicare tax. Another round of taxes are the state taxes. And so state taxes are going to vary from state to state. Here in Utah, it's around 5%. So 5% here in Utah if you sell a property and you don't do a 1031. The third round of taxes are going to be a recapture of depreciation. So when you own investment property, every year when you file your tax return, there's a significant tax credit for depreciation. And most people take that depreciation every year on their tax return. And when you sell that property, the IRS wants some of it back, and it's called a recapture of depreciation, and that rate is 25%. So 25 cents on every dollar that you depreciated that property, the IRS wants back. So if you don't do a 1031, you're paying federal tax, you're paying the Medicare tax maybe, you're paying state taxes, and you're paying a depreciation recapture. So knowing all of that information now, let's use a sort of basic real-life example. Let's assume that you've owned a property for many years. You paid $50,000 for that property, didn't make any capital improvements, but you did depreciate that property down to zero. Now you're selling that property for $100,000. Okay, so here on the left-hand side, it's a typical sale. That means you're selling it and you're not doing a 1031 exchange. On the right-hand side, you're doing a 1031 exchange. So if you sell a property for $100,000 and you're not doing an exchange, under this scenario, you're paying $12,500 as a depreciation recapture. Why $12,500? Well, you bought the property for $50,000 and you depreciated that property down to zero. That's $50,000 of depreciation. The IRS wants 25% of that back, meaning 25% of $50,000 is $12,500. Okay, so the federal tax is going to be $7,500 under this example. Why $7,500? Well, you bought the property for $50,000. It appreciated to $100,000, and so that's $50,000 of gain. And at 15% federal for most people, 15% of $50,000 is $7,500. There are some stars next to this number because if you make $200,000 as an individual or $250,000 as a married couple, then there's a 3.8% Medicare tax. 3.8% times $50,000 of capital gains is $1,900. If you make more than $400,000 as an individual or $450,000 as a married couple, you're also going to pay this $2,500 of additional capital gains tax. Why? Because the capital gains rate goes up to 20% for those that make $400,000 as an individual or $450,000 as a married couple. State taxes are $2,500. Again, your gain on this example was $50,000, and 5% of $50,000 is $2,500. So the gist of this is that if you're not doing a 1031, you're paying a lot of taxes here. Your total taxes is going to be $26,900, leaving you $73,100 in your pocket. That gives you a buying power of, on a 20% down model, it gives you a buying power of $365,500. Whereas if you don't do a if you do do a 1031 exchange on the right-hand side up here, you're not paying any of these taxes. Of course, you have to do the 1031 correctly, but if you do a 1031 exchange, you're not paying any of these taxes. It leaves you with the full $100,000 in your pocket, and you can go out and buy a property on a 20% down model of $500,000. Okay, let's talk about the concept of boot. Boot is a funny term. It just basically means if you're doing a 1031 exchange, it doesn't mean that you're not paying taxes. And it really comes down, whether you pay taxes or not on a 1031 exchange comes down to whether you have boot in your exchange. And boot just means somewhere along the line, you received cash from the sale of your property in your own pocket. And if you receive cash in your own pocket, it's boot. And that boot is taxable. So if you're doing a 1031 exchange, you want to avoid boot. You don't want boot because you don't want to pay taxes, right? So the two basic rules on a 1031 exchange to avoid boot are, number one, you want to trade for equal or greater value. You sell for $100,000, you want to buy for $100,000 or greater, right? So number one, trade for equal or greater value. Number two, you want to trade all the money that you receive from the sale of your relinquished property, all the money that you receive from the sale of the property that you're selling, you want to use all that money towards the purchase of the new property. If you trade down in value, or if you trade down in equity or proceeds, or if you keep some of that cash from the sale of your property, then you'll be taxed on the difference of that trade down. Okay, so using that general rule, let's go through some examples here. Okay, so the relinquished property on the left-hand side, that's the property that you're selling in the exchange. Replacement property is the one that you're buying. Okay, so let's assume that you're selling a property for $300,000. On that property, you have a loan of $100,000 and equity of $200,000. Well, you set up a 1031 exchange, you sell that property, and then you go into a new property and you buy a new property, and the new property is also $300,000. You go out and get a loan of $100,000, and you use all of your equity, $200,000, as a down payment on that property. So do we have any boot in this transaction? So people are nodding their head no. So no boot. And the reason for that is that we traded for equal or greater value, and we used all of this money that we received from the sale, we used it all towards the purchase. Okay, so let's use a more difficult example here. So you're selling a property for $300,000, and on that property you have equity of $200,000 and a loan of $100,000. So you sell that property, you do a 1031, and you come over here on the right-hand side and you buy a property again for $300,000. But instead of using the full $200,000 of equity, you only use $150,000 of it. Instead of using the full $200,000, you go out and get a loan for $150,000. So your loan has increased by $50,000 and your equity has decreased by $50,000. So are we going to have boot on this transaction? So we're going to have boot. And the reason we have boot is that we had $200,000 that we received from the sale, and $50,000 of that didn't get used. So the way that we see this in a real-life example is sometimes a client, sometimes a real estate investor, when they sell this property up here, they will instruct the title company to give them $50,000. So they have $200,000 coming to them, but they'll say, look, I want to do a 1031, but I only want $150,000 of it to go into to go into the 1031 exchange account, and I want $50,000 to come to me directly at closing. And so once they receive that $50,000, and that's okay to do, but once they receive that $50,000, it's taxable to them. Another way that we see it is the client will set up a 1031, and they'll instruct that the full $200,000 will come to us, but when they go to buy their replacement property, as they start talking with their lender, they'll overshoot on the loan. And so all they really need here is a $100,000 loan, but they'll overshoot on that, and they'll get a loan that's too big for the property, too big for their transaction. And so then at closing, when they send the settlement statement around and we see that the settlement statement is only asking for $150,000, we have a problem, right? Because we have $200,000 sitting in the exchange account, and the settlement statement is only calling for $150,000. So we will send the $150,000. The replacement property will close, and then once the exchange is expired, we'll send the $50,000 that's sitting in the exchange account. We'll send that back to the client, and they'll have to pay taxes on that. Okay, so we have one more example here. Client is selling for $300,000. They've got equity of $200,000 and a loan of $100,000, and they go out and they buy another property for $200,000. So instead of buying for $300,000, they buy for $200,000, and no loan, and but they did use the full equity here. So they used all their equity and paid cash for that replacement property. So do we have boot here? We most certainly have boot here. So a lot of people, a lot of real estate investors, they want to get out of debt, right? They want to sell their property. They want to get out of debt. So a great idea is, well, I'm gonna sell this property, and I'm gonna do a 1031 and not pay any taxes, right? But I'm also gonna get out of debt, and this mortgage that I had on my old property, I'm just not gonna get a new mortgage on the new property. I'm just gonna trade down in value and just pay cash for the new property. Well, we know, because we've been talking about it, you have to trade for equal or greater value. And so as great as it sounds to get out of debt, you do have to replace that mortgage over here. And so that's why they call it mortgage boot, because you didn't replace the mortgage. And there are ways to solve this problem here. This client, this person, this real estate investor could solve this problem by going and buying a second property in their exchange for at least $100,000. You don't have to replace, you're not limited to just one property. You can do two properties. And so they need to buy a second property here. Okay, the qualified intermediary. In our industry, the qualified intermediary is called the QI. So I'm going to refer to the qualified intermediary as the QI. Can everyone still hear me? Okay. Okay, so what is the qualified intermediary, the QI? That's who we are. First American Exchange is the QI. And the QI is someone that prepares all the requisite 1031 documents at closing. So when you sell your property, you have 1031 documents. When you buy your property, you have 1031 documents. You also have to identify in your 1031 exchange. And as the QI, we assist you with all of that documentation. But the QI also holds on to the money. So in a 1031 exchange, the IRS requires that when you sell your property in a 1031 exchange, the money has to be held by a third party. So the QI is that third party. And our company acts as a QI. So who cannot be the QI? So you can't, we actually get this, we get this question every once in a while. We'll get a call from a real estate investor that'll say, I want to do an exchange, but I don't necessarily want to pay someone like you guys, First American, to be the QI. Can I have my neighbor, or can I have my CPA, or can I have my attorney, or can I have my relative be the QI? And of course, none of those people can be the QI, because what the IRS says is that an agent of the taxpayer or the real estate investor doing the exchange cannot be the QI. It's got to be a third party. And so you've got to set it up through a legitimate third-party QI service. Okay, so now we're getting to the good part here. We have some newspaper clippings here. We have a lot of newspaper clippings. We talked about how the real estate market from 2008, 2009, and 2010 was really a sad market for real estate. I was working in that market. I was doing exchanges. I was in the same position that I'm in now. And of course, 2008, 2009, 2010, those were hard years for us. They were hard years for me. We weren't very busy. And so, but I did have some competitors. And here, these newspaper clippings are basically clippings of my competitors that left the market as QIs during that time frame. So we're going to talk about that. So how do you choose a QI? Well, the number one company up here, Southwest Exchange. Southwest Exchange was one of my competitors in 2008, 2009, and that's a company that went bankrupt during that time frame when the real estate market was sad. Southwest Exchange was supposed to have $97 million of real estate investor money, of 1031 money. They filed bankruptcy, and they didn't have that money. Why didn't they have that money? Because Southwest Exchange was a company that was owned by an individual. It was a small company. Even though they had $97 million, they were a small company. And small companies are not audited the same way that large companies are. There's a federal law called Sarbanes-Oxley, and pursuant to Sarbanes-Oxley, large companies like First American have to pay outside auditors on a quarterly basis. Every 3 months, we have to pay an Ernst & Young or a PricewaterhouseCoopers to come into our offices and check our financial books. And so every quarter we have accountants coming in looking at our account or at all of our accounts to make sure that we're not doing anything weird with our clients' money. Well, Southwest Exchange was a small company, not subject to those same audit restrictions. And so this guy that owned Southwest Exchange, he was stealing client money, and he was using client money, 1031 money, to sort of fund his own personal life. He was also using the money to fund other business ventures. And so by the time people figured this out, the $97 million was gone. I mean, there was some of it was still left, but he filed bankruptcy, and through the bankruptcy process, some people got some of their money back, but it took a really long time, and most people got pennies on the dollar in terms of getting their money back. Summit Exchange up here is number 2. Summit Exchange is a company that was again, a small company. They had an office in Oregon, and they had an office in Park City, Utah. And during that same time frame, they went bankrupt. They were supposed to have $40 million, and they had about $25 million at the time of their bankruptcy. Why did Summit Exchange go bankrupt? Summit Exchange was not committing fraud like the first company was. But what Summit Exchange was doing was, as a competitive advantage in our industry, one of the things that we do as a 1031 company is we hold your money, and we charge you a fee to do the exchange, but we also offer a rate of return on your money. So your money might be sitting with us for 30 or 40 or 60 or 90 days, and during that time frame, we will offer you a rate of return, an interest rate. Summit Exchange during that time frame, as a competitive advantage over a company like us, they were sticking their money in real estate projects. They were investing your 1031 money in real estate projects, and during that time frame of 2004, 5, 6, and 7, those real estate projects were doing really well. And so they were able to offer their clients that were doing exchanges with them a really good rate of return. And that rate of return was higher than our rate of return, because at First American, we place your funds into a bank account with a bank that you've heard of. And it's an FDIC-insured bank account, and the money sits with the bank account with the bank until the exchange is done, and then when you need it, we send it for the purchase of your property. Well, when you put money in a bank, in an account that's fully liquid at all times, that interest rate isn't very high, but that's what we offer. Summit Exchange was killing us because they were able to offer a higher interest rate, and people were going with them. But obviously, when the market turned in 2008, 2009, 2010, those real estate projects that Summit Exchange was investing in, those projects went down down as well with the real estate market. And so that was their problem. They weren't committing fraud, but they were just a little overly aggressive with their 1031 deposits. And again, at First American, we place your deposits with a bank like Citibank, where you've heard of the bank, they're FDIC-insured accounts. The interest rate isn't super exciting, but the purpose of the exchange is for us to keep your exchange safe, your funds safe. Okay, so you guys kind of get the picture. Land America Exchange was also a company that went bankrupt. I have a client right now. We've done several exchanges for probably 10 years for this client. He did an exchange with Land America Exchange basically on a Friday during the same time frame, 2008, 2009. He set up an exchange with Land America Exchange, and on a Friday, his property closed, and the money from the sale of his property went to Land America Exchange, and the following Monday, his money was gone because Land America Exchange had filed bankruptcy over the weekend. And so he sets up his exchange on a Friday, and on Monday he finds out that the company that he chose had filed bankruptcy. Land America Exchange was not committing fraud. They weren't stealing money like Southwest Exchange was. But again, they were like Summit Exchange. They were taking their client money and they were putting those funds into investments that were a little bit too aggressive. And as a result of that, when the market turned, they didn't have the money that they needed to pay their clients back. Okay, so now that I've scared everyone away from ever doing an exchange, that's not the purpose. That's really not the purpose, though. The purpose is that, at the start of this presentation, I wanted to, one of the key points for me was to say, why First American? Why would you use First American versus, one of our competitors? And so when you look for a QI, the thing that you want to look for, number one, is financial security, financial strength of the QI. Is the QI that you're choosing to work with a company that has deep pockets, or is it a company that's owned by one or two people? If you have a $500,000 deposit or $1 million deposit, do you want to deposit that money with a company that's owned by an individual that doesn't even have that level of assets in his own account, so that if something happens with that person or with that company, you want to make sure that your money's there? And so with First American, we are wholly owned by First American Title Insurance Company, which is a national provider of title and escrow services, and our ultimate parent is a publicly traded company, First American Financial Corporation, and that company has assets in the billions of dollars. Again, we talked about this. When you're dealing with a large company, so we have deep pockets. We have our company is a deep pocket, but we're also on a quarterly basis, we have outside auditors that come in and look at our books to make sure that we aren't doing weird things with your money, like stealing it and using it for boats and concert tickets and vacations. The second thing that you want to look at is whether the company that you're choosing has a fidelity bond. What is a fidelity bond? A fidelity bond is basically insurance for fraudulent acts. If I make a bad hire, I have a team that does 1031 exchanges, and if I make a bad hire and I hire someone that steals your money, everyone knows of someone, whether it's 7-Eleven or a law firm, right? We know of people that have stolen money from their employer, right? Well, at our company, we are holding other people's money. We're holding hundreds of millions of dollars. And so if I make a bad hire and one of my employees steals money, siphons money from each one of these bank accounts and sends that money into their own account, well, we're going to find out, and we have insurance for that, and that's what the fidelity bond is for. And so at First American, our fidelity bond is $20 million. So when you choose your QI, make sure that you choose a QI that has that fidelity bond. Errors and omissions insurance. When you choose a QI, make sure that you choose a QI that has insurance for negligent acts. What's a negligent act? Well, if I hire someone that is just let me back up. If I hire someone that makes a mistake, and as a result of that mistake, they lose your money, in our industry right now, we have hundreds and thousands of 1031 exchange accounts. And so every day we're constantly sending wires to title companies to fund properties. We're sending wires here and there, and it gets pretty hectic. Well, right now, there are internet hackers. I know this sounds weird, but it's very real. We have internet hackers, and right now the popular thing for internet hackers is to hack into title companies and exchange companies' emails and figure out what's going on with the transaction. They can figure out who you're working with, and they will hack into your system, and they'll send you an email and pretend to be someone that is involved in the transaction, and they'll send you fraudulent wiring instructions, and they'll trick you into sending money to their account instead of to the title company's account or to the bank's account. So you're meaning to send money to the right place, but you send it to the wrong place, a thief, and as a result of that, the money's gone, right? Well, if you're dealing with a company that has E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, that means that if I have an employee that makes a mistake and is tricked by sending the money to the wrong place, then we have insurance for that. When you choose a QI, you want to make sure that the QI is licensed. Not all states require that the QI be licensed in that state, but there are some states that do. And so First American Exchange is a national provider of 1031 exchange services, and we are licensed in every state that requires a license. Okay. Qualified property for the 1031 exchange. The like-kind requirement is very broad. It just means you have to swap real estate for real estate. And so if you have a single-family residence, you can swap it with raw ground. If you have an industrial property, you can swap it with retail. If you have an office, you can swap it with a barn, a farm. All these properties are interchangeable on the 1031 exchange program. What else is like-kind? Well, you can sell a property at 100% ownership, and you can go into a new property at a tenant in common ownership, meaning you're not buying the whole property, you're buying it with other owners. So you can sell a 100% property and go into a percentage interest property. You can sell a 30-year leasehold interest. You can sell conservation easements and water rights. Water rights here in Utah are pretty popular. The water right has to be something that's transferred by deed and not by a share in an irrigation company. Okay, so on the 1031 program, it has to be real estate for real estate. It also has to be U.S. property for U.S. property. We have clients that will set up an exchange, they'll sell their property, and the money will come to us, and then they'll leave and go on vacation, right? And so the money's sitting with us, they're in France, they're driving around France, and they'll call us up and say, look, I know I have to identify property, right? I've got this exchange set up with you guys. Can I use my money from my 1031 to buy a cute little chateau here in France? And of course, the IRS wants to keep potentially taxable money here in the United States, and so you can't sell a U.S. property and buy a chateau in France, and you also can't sell the Washington Monument and trade it for the Eiffel Tower. So it's got to be U.S. property for U.S. property. Okay, so there's actually a question here from a viewer. Can you sell a property? So the question that I have here is that can I use a 1031 exchange to sell a fourplex and invest in several single-family rental properties? Well, on a 1031 exchange program, you can sell one large property and go into 3 smaller properties, or vice versa, sell 3 properties and go into a large property. So yes, you can sell a fourplex and go into 4 single-family residences if you want to. You just need to make sure that the values are there. So you still want to trade for equal or greater value, but you can combine 4 properties to get you to where you need to be on that valuation. Okay, qualified use requirements. So we talked about it has to be real estate for real estate. It has to be U.S. property for U.S. property. It's also got to be business or investment property for business or investment property. So the way that you use the property is important. So with that in mind, if this is your primary residence, this is a really nice looking house. If this is your primary residence, it's not a property that you can do a 1031 exchange with. But if this is a property, even though it looks like a primary residence, if this is a property that you're renting to a third party, then it's a good property for a 1031. Vacation homes. What if you have a home, St. George, Park City, if you have a home that you want to buy or that you currently own and you want to sell on a 1031, and it's a home that you use for personal use, but you also rent it out, that's a vacation home. If it's a vacation home, you can do a 1031 exchange, but there are certain guidelines. And so basically, what the guidelines are is that for a 2-year period before you sell a vacation home, you have to rent that property out for 14 days per year, and you have to limit your personal use to either 14 days per year or to 10% of the rental period for that particular year. So before you sell a vacation home, make sure that you fit within those guidelines. And then if you buy a vacation home on a 1031, again, for a 2-year period, rent it out for 14 days per year, and limit your personal use to either 14 days per year or 10% of the rental period for that year. Okay, we've covered all of those topics. Mixed use properties. Well, sometimes you have a property like a farm, a bed and breakfast, or a duplex. Sometimes you have a property like that where you live on the property and it's your primary residence, but it's also a property that you rent out as an investment property. So we know you can't do a 1031 with a primary residence, right? But you can do a 1031 with an investment property. What if the property has a combination of both of those uses? Well, you can do a 1031 exchange for the investment side of your property. So if you own a duplex and you live in that duplex, you can sell that duplex and you can carve out the value of that duplex that was your primary residence, and you can take your primary residence exemption of $250 for an individual or $250 or $500 for a married couple, and then you can carve out the value of that duplex and do a 1031 exchange on the investment side of that duplex. Stock and trade doesn't qualify for a 1031. So basically what we're talking about here is that the IRS, they don't want home builders or developers like Donald Trump to do 1031 exchanges. And so if you're buying large pieces of property, large tracts of land, and you're cutting up those lands and subdividing those large tracts of land and then selling off either lots or building homes and selling off homes, or if you're Donald Trump and you buy big pieces of property on Las Vegas Boulevard and you're building a high-rise condo tower and then you're selling condo units, those are considered stock and trade in our industry. And basically, if you're a developer and you develop real estate that way, it's not really, the 1031 exchange program is not really the right program. Okay. So we've talked about the property has to be real estate for real estate. It has to be U.S. for U.S. It's got to be business or investment for business or investment. So let's talk about the time frames. When you do a 1031, you get 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. So here we have day 0. Day 0 is the date that you're sitting at the title company, signing the settlement statement, signing all your documents. Day 0 is the day of closing of the relinquished property. On day 1, we will send you an email with a welcome packet. The welcome packet will have all your deadlines, a summary of all your deadlines. We'll provide you with an identification form for the 1031, and we'll give you a statement of account showing the money that we have in your 1031 exchange. So here's the 45 days that you get to identify, and then 180 days to close. Here's what the identification form looks like. So on day 1, we're going to send you an email. We're going to send you a copy of this identification form. It's really easy. You just get 3 slots here. You can put in 3 addresses. You sign it, you date it, and then you email it back to my office. Can you identify more than 3 properties? Well, under certain circumstances, you can go above 3 properties. If you go above 3 properties, you just need to make sure that you add up the value of all the properties on your list, and the total value of all the properties on your list cannot be more than 2 times the value of the property that you sold. So if you sell for $100,000 and you only identify 3 properties or less, it doesn't matter how much those properties are worth. Of course, you want to trade for equal or greater value, but there's no limitation on the value of the properties that are on your identification form. But if you go to the 4th property, then all of a sudden you have to worry about the values. You've got to add up all the values, and you've got to make sure that the total combined value of all the properties on your list is not more than $200,000 under that $100,000 example. Okay, so here's some tips for maximizing the ID period, because honestly, in a 2018 real estate market, it's really hard to find good property, right? You've got a lot of buyers out there. You've got multiple offers. It's really hard to find property, especially if you get a property under contract and then you do your due diligence and you find a bad foundation, or you find out that there's a cow farm across the street that makes it smell really bad. So it's really hard to find good property. And so what do you do if you're going to do a 1031 exchange? If you're doing an exchange and you know you're doing a 1031 exchange, you don't want to wait until your property closes to start looking for property, right? You want to start looking for property the minute you know you're going to do a 1031 exchange, which is before you even sell your relinquished property. You need to be out looking for property so that when your 45 days starts ticking, you kind of have a game plan. You know exactly what it is that you're going to put on your identification form so that it's not a risk. We have lots of clients that are just not able to identify property during the 45-day period. We have lots of clients that do identify property, and then they get to the end of the 45 days, and those properties just don't work out. And so you wanna really be looking for property before you sell your relinquished property. Okay, holding requirements. The question comes up, well, I have a property. I've held the property for 6 months. Is that enough time to sell the property and do a 1031 exchange? Is there a holding period requirement with Section 1031? And of course, it's a common question, but there is no specific holding rule. There's no specific period of time in Section 1031. A lot of CPAs will say 1 year. Most CPAs will say 2 years, but that's just a rule of thumb. There's no specific bright line rule in Section 1031 as to a holding period. Okay, so with that, we're going to play a little game. The Real Estate Millionaire. So you're doing a 1031 exchange. You want to do a 1031 exchange. How long must a person who owns property, how long must a person own a piece of property before they can do a 1031 exchange? Is it A, 1 year, B, 2 years, C, no IRS guidance, D, 1 tax filing period? Okay, so we have, is it Miss DeFrancesca? Okay. No IRS guidance. So you will get some CPAs that will tell you, as a rule of thumb, that you should hold it 1 year. You will get some CPAs that will say, as a rule of thumb, hold it for 2 years. But the real answer here is there's no IRS guidance because Section 1031 is completely silent on this issue. Well, the accountant will tell you that because they're trying to minimize risk for you. Even though there's no specific time frame, they feel like 2 years is a good rule of thumb that you're going to be okay. It's not a guarantee, but that's why it's a rule of thumb. They might say, well, we've never had, in the 20 years that I've been practicing as a CPA, we've never had someone that's held the property for at least 2 years have their 1031 exchange overturned because of not holding it for a long enough period of time. So it's a rule of thumb that, well, and to be honest, there are other. I should also mention, 2 years is popular because there are other sections of the code, not Section 1031. There are other sections of the code where the IRS uses a 2-year rule as an important time frame, and so they've kind of adopted that 2-year time frame from other sections of the code. So with the holding requirement, the length is not defined in the regulations. The key is the intent of the taxpayer at the time the taxpayer acquired the property. So what the IRS will look at if they audit your file is, what were you thinking as a real estate investor when you bought this property? Were you thinking, I'm going to buy this property and hold it and rent it out? Or as a real estate investor, were you thinking, oh, I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to put some new paint in the, on the walls, and I'm going to put some new carpet on the floors, and then I'm going to immediately put the property on the market to try to sell it. So the IRS wants you to see, the IRS wants to see the real estate investor that is going to hold it and rent it versus, you know, fix it up and flip it. So that's the key distinction. Title parking exchanges. We're going to cover this really quickly. If you're wanting to do a 1031 exchange and you're in a situation, most 1031 exchanges are situations where you're selling first and buying second. Well, if you're in a situation where you want to buy first, you find a perfect property that you want to buy first, and then you have a property in mind that you want to sell, but you need to sell it after you buy the new property, then you can do a 1031. It's called a reverse 1031 exchange. So it is available. In a reverse exchange, and we talked about that. So what are the reasons for a reverse exchange? Well, you know, in this market, in a 2018 market, it's really hard to find a good property, right? It's easier to sell than it is to buy. Well, if you go out and find a really good property and you want that property, you need to move on it. And so you want to get it under contract and you want to get it purchased, and then you can figure out later what you're going to sell. And because things are selling so quickly, it's a lot easier to run it through the reverse 1031 program and sell your property within 180 days on the 1031. So that's just the biggest reason that we see for reverse exchanges. So in a reverse exchange, basically you need to hire an exchange accommodation title holder. So First American Exchange, we are a QI. We hold the money in the 1031 exchange program, but we're also an exchange accommodation title holder. So if you need to set up a reverse exchange, you come to us, and we, as an exchange accommodation title holder, will buy and acquire the new property, the one that you want to buy. We will acquire that property. We still have to borrow money from you guys, the real estate investor, but we'll buy the property, we'll hold it, and that gives you 180 days to sell your old property. When you sell your old property, the money from the sale comes to us as your QI, and then we will complete the reverse exchange by transferring ownership of the new property to you, to the party doing the exchange, and then we'll use the money that we received from the sale to reimburse the real estate investor for the money that the real estate investor loaned to us to purchase that new property. Reverse exchanges are difficult in a residential market because in order to do a reverse exchange on a residential piece of property, you basically have to pay cash for that property. So if there's a lender involved, outside lender involved, institutional type lender, it's really difficult to do a reverse exchange. Why? Because lenders just don't cooperate with this whole, the 1031 company acquiring and holding the property for 6 months. Okay, so we've talked about that. How are we doing on time, by the way? Like, we're good? And how long were you expecting this to go? Okay. I think we're about 10 minutes away. Okay. Okay, so let's go through some special exchange issues. These are issues that come up over and over and over again in our industry, and so basically the same taxpayer requirement. So when you do a 1031 exchange, the way that you sell your property needs to be the same way that you buy your new property. So Mark Bullock sells a property in his individual name, then Mark Bullock needs to acquire the new property, right? Well, if it's Mark Bullock and Emily Bullock, that's my wife's name, then on the new property it's got to be Mark Bullock and Emily Bullock as husband and wife. If you sell the property as Mark Bullock LLC, then you got to buy the new property as Mark Bullock LLC, or Mark Bullock Corporation. You got to buy the next property as Mark Bullock Corporation. So if you sell as a corporation, as an LLC, a trust, or as an individual, you've got to purchase the next property in your exchange the same way that you sold. there are a couple of exceptions. So before we play this game, we'll talk about the exceptions. Okay, so the general rule is that you have to buy the new property the same way that you sold your old property. The two notable exceptions are, number one, if it's a single-member LLC, for whatever reason, the IRS considers a single-member LLC to be a pass-through entity. It's a disregarded entity for tax purposes. So a single-member LLC is interchangeable with the single member that owns that LLC. So if you sell as a single-member LLC, you can go into the new property in that same LLC name, or you can go into that new property in the name of that sole member, or you can set up a totally new LLC as long as that new LLC is owned by the same sole member as the old LLC. The other exception is a living trust. If it's a revocable living trust or a grantor trust, same thing. That trust is a disregarded tax entity, and it doesn't have its own tax status. It flows to the owner of that trust, and so those are interchangeable. And so with that explanation, we're going to play another game of Real Estate Millionaire. Okay, so I probably should have been standing here the whole time. If an exchanger sells a property through a revocable living trust, then they must take title to the next property, the replacement property, A, in the trust, B, as an individual, C, under a new entity with the trust as a sole member, or D, all options. This is a difficult one because we're basically taking the general rule being that you have to acquire the new property the same way that you sold the old property. We're taking that general rule, and we are exploiting the two exceptions to that rule, which are a single-member LLC and a living trust. And so if you're selling as a revocable living trust, then A is correct, because if you sell as a living trust, you can certainly take title to the next property in the same living trust. B is correct because a living trust is interchangeable with the individual that owns that trust, and so you could choose to buy the next property in the name of the individual that owns that trust. C is correct because a single-member LLC is a disregarded entity just like a trust, and so the trust could choose to buy the next property as the sole member of a new single-member LLC, and that would be fine. And so basically, all options are correct here. Okay, what about refinancing? So you're selling a property, and you want to do a 1031, and you want to be smart. You want to, before closing, you want to pull all the equity out of that property through a refinance, pull all the money out of that property, put it in your pocket so that you don't have to actually send that money forward towards the purchase of your new replacement property. Can you do that? Is that okay? Well, it's typically not okay to do a refinance of your relinquished property within a short time frame before you sell that property on a 1031 exchange. And so don't pull out all of your equity 2 or 3 months before you sell that relinquished property on a 1031. Don't pull out all the equity through a refi, because that's where the IRS is going to come in and say, we really wanted that money to go forward and be used towards the purchase of the replacement property. You pulled it out before closing. We don't like that. We're gonna consider that to be taxable boot and charge you taxes on that. It's generally considered okay to do a 1031 exchange and buy your replacement property, and then after you buy your replacement property and close on your replacement property, it's generally considered to be okay to refinance that replacement property and pull equity out at that point in time. A couple of things that you want to consider is you want to have a time buffer between the actual purchase of that replacement property and the actual refinance. We don't know how long of a time buffer, but you certainly don't want to have the purchase and the refinance on the same day. So have a time buffer, and then you want to have a legitimate business reason for making that refi, for pulling that equity out. Some sort of business reason for doing that, not just to put the money in your account to have that money to buy personal things like cars and vacations. Okay, so we've reached the end. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I actually have a couple of questions here, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we answered one of the questions. Second question here from the viewers is there a limit on the number of properties that I can buy? Can I buy 4, 5, 6 properties? So there is no limitation on the number of properties that you can buy. In theory, you can buy 100 properties if you wanted to. If you sold your property on a 1031 and you had 100 properties all lined up on day 2 of your exchange to close, you could certainly do that. But we do have limitations on the number of properties that you can identify. So once you get to day 45 of your exchange and you have to submit your identification form, there are some limitations. We talked about those limitations. If you identify more than 3, you just have to make sure that the total value of all your properties on that form doesn't exceed 2 times the value of the property you sold in the exchange. Okay, so that's question number 2. So question number 3, is there any way to access the 1031 exchange money to pay for expenses associated with properties before the actual sales are completed? So can you pull money out of your 1031 exchange account to pay like an inspection cost or an appraisal or repairs? So as a general rule, most 1031 companies, including our company, once the 1031 exchange relinquished property is closed and we are in possession of the 1031 funds, we don't like to send the money out of the account to pay for miscellaneous items. We like to send the money out. If it's an earnest money deposit, certainly call us and we'll take 1031 money out of your account to pay for an earnest money deposit. If you need that money to purchase your next property in the exchange, we can send the money for that. But for miscellaneous items, we don't necessarily like to pay miscellaneous items, but if the item that you want us to pay is a valid exchange expense, meaning it's something that the IRS would be okay with, if that expense were on the settlement statement, then technically, yes, you can ask us to pay that item as long as we're paying the item directly to the vendor and as long as that money is not going into your pocket as the real estate investor that's doing the exchange. We can pay that item directly to the vendor. If it's a valid exchange expense, then it's not taxable. If it's not a valid exchange expense, but it does customarily appear on a settlement statement, we can still pay it. It just means that it's going to be taxable to you. And so we can pay vendors directly if it's a valid exchange expense. We can also pay vendors directly if it's not a valid exchange expense, so long as that expense is something that customarily appears on a settlement statement. If it's not a valid exchange expense, again, it's going to be taxable, but we can pay it. So those are all the questions. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it back over to Nate. Sorry, one more question. When you do a 1031 exchange, the question is if you depreciate your property down to 0, can you start your depreciation on the next property? Yeah, and that's why a lot of people do the 1031 exchange, is they've run out of depreciation on a property and it's time to move into a newer property where they can start over.
So basically, if you kept doing this, you'd never have to pay taxes on your gains.
Well, if you sell a property, I mean, you can continue to do 1031 exchanges forever, and as long as you do valid exchanges forever, you would never have to pay taxes, right? But if you ever come to a period of time where you sell and you don't do a 1031 exchange, then you're paying taxes not only on that property that you sold, but you're paying taxes on all the properties that are sort of in the chain of the 1031 exchange, right? And so really the only way to avoid paying taxes is to keep those properties and don't sell them during your lifetime and then just pass them on to your kids. And when you pass them on to your kids get those properties at a stepped-up basis, meaning they don't have to pay any of the capital gains taxes that accrue during your lifetime. They only have to pay capital gains taxes that accrue on appreciation that occurs after they inherit that property. And so if you sell when you're alive, you'll have to pay the taxes. If you keep it and pass it on to your kids, they don't have to pay those capital gains taxes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, except that when you say you have to pay the capital gains for all of the properties, you add them all up? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a complicated formula where, so you've done 1031 exchanges, and you've deferred the taxes from property 1 to property 2, and from property 1 and 2 to property 3, and so on. Well, if you get to the 10th property and you sell that property and you don't do an exchange, then the IRS wants you to pay taxes that would have been paid on each of the 10 properties. And so that you would have a...
So you shouldn't do a 1031 if you ever intend to sell the property outright.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it just depends on what your tax situation is. I mean, from my perspective, if I'm going into the retirement age, why would I ever sell real estate? Because real estate is a good way to fund your retirement, right? Real estate.
Unless you end up in a rest home somewhere and there's no money left. I mean, if you have several properties, you might have to sell one to pay for your health care or something. I mean,
If you're in a situation where you're in such dire need of funds in that way, it may be that your tax rate is so low that that the capital gains doesn't even apply to you. There are some people that if they truly have no income, such that they have to sell a property and that's their only income, they may qualify for like a hardship from the capital gains tax. I mean, it becomes a complicated tax question. But for the most part, if you're aging and you have, real estate, you don't really want to sell it because you want to keep that real estate and have those rents fund your retirement. I wouldn't sell and pay the tax unless I absolutely had to. But good question. Any other questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
Can I steal the mic?
Yeah.
So with all of your experience with helping, clients with 1031s, what would you say maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3 mistakes that people make with 1031s, and how do they avoid that? If that's
absolutely. So what are common pitfalls? We've talked about some of them. Definitely a common pitfall is closing on your relinquished property and not setting up a 1031 exchange, right? Another pitfall that we see a lot is going into that replacement property and just getting a loan that's too big for the transaction, and it just results in 1031 money not being used towards the replacement property. And that's always a hard situation because we don't find out about it until we receive the settlement statement, and then we're reviewing the settlement statement, and we can see that the loan is too big and we can't use all that 1031 money. And then at that point in time, the lender is too far along in the loan process and they're not willing to change their loan. And so that's an issue. Another pitfall is, just like I said, waiting too long to go out and look for your properties. We have clients that are kind of fumbling around trying to figure out what they're going to buy, and that's a problem. Another pitfall is if you're selling a property and you own that property in an LLC or you own it in a corporation, some sort of an entity. And of course, we know that if you sell a property and you own it in an entity, you've got to buy the next one in an entity, right? Well, if you're buying residential property and you plan on financing that purchase with a loan, the lender is not going to allow an entity to sign the loan documents, right? They're not going to allow an entity to buy that residential property if there's a loan involved. And so you've got to do some planning there and make sure that when you go into that new property, you're going in as an individual, because if you need a loan, lenders only loan to individuals. And so when you set up a 1031 exchange, you kind of have to do some planning and make sure that you're selling it as an individual so that you don't get caught with that lender not loaning you funds. Some other common pitfalls are, those are probably the most common ones that I see. Yes, sir.
Real quick, do you ever see, I think the answer to this is no, but I'm just wondering, do you ever see that there's ever any extensions to that, specifically the 45-day identification timeline, or is that pretty?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So the question is okay, the 45 days is a very short period of time to identify, right? Well, is there ever a time when the IRS would extend that period of time to, give people more time to identify? Well, this is a hard issue because we do have clients that will call us and say, look, the properties that the properties that I identified are just not working out for me. Will you just be willing to accept this new identification form from me? We're on day 65. Will you accept this new identification form from me and just throw away the one that I submitted to you on day 35 when it was within that period? And of course, we can't do that because that's where we can get in a lot of trouble with the IRS. And so once you, as a general rule, once you pass day 45, you're kind of out of luck. You're stuck with those properties that are on your list. We do see extensions here and there. The types of extensions that we see from the IRS are, specifically this last year, we had some really bad hurricanes in Florida, in Georgia. So if you're in a place where, if you're within that area and there's a really bad hurricane such that, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of your life are just kind of wasted because you're dealing with that hurricane, then the IRS will come out with a bulletin and they'll send it to us and they'll say, okay, if you're within this area, then we're going to give you an extension of 90 days, 120 days, whatever it is. And that was something that they did with these hurricanes that happened. They did that. They've done it a few times, but for the most part, it has to be like a 9/11 type of thing. It has to be a hurricane. It has to be like some sort of a catastrophe for the IRS to grant an extension. It's not going to be the type of thing where the IRS says, oh, you're in a really hot real estate market and it's hard for you to find a good property, so we're just going to give you an extension. That's not something that the IRS is going to do. Yes, sir.
Are the 1031 exchange forms submitted to the IRS, or are they included in the transaction documents?
That's a great question. So how does the IRS know that you're doing a 1031? So when you close a real estate transaction, whether it's at First American Title or U.S. Title or wherever, by law, the title company is required to fill out a 1099-S. And the 1099-S is a very basic document, but it just summarizes what was sold, how much it was sold for, and who sold it. And then once the real estate transaction is done, the title company will send that 1099-S to the IRS. And so that puts the IRS on notice that that you sold a property and how much you sold it for and the address of the property. Okay, so then when you file your tax return in April, the IRS is sitting there waiting. Okay, we've got this 1099-S. Now we want to know what this guy is going to do with it. Is he going to pay taxes on it, or is he going to tell me that he did a 1031 exchange? So you do the 1031 exchange program through us, and we prepare and make sure that you sign all the requisite 1031 documents, including your identification form, and then we keep that all on file. And we don't do anything with it. We don't submit that to the IRS. We just keep it on file. So then when you file your tax return, there is a form, 8824 form. It's kind of an addendum to your tax return form, and it's just a very basic form where you tell the IRS that you did a 1031 exchange with that property. This is what you sold. This is what you bought. You traded for, equal or greater value, and you used all your 1031 money, and so your 1031's great. You submit that form with your tax return, and so the IRS will compare that to the 1099-S that they received, and if they don't audit your file, then we don't hear anything else. Well, if they do audit your file, then they'll ask us for a copy of all your 1031 exchange documents, and then we will go to our computer file, we'll pull your exchange documents, we'll send those to the IRS. They'll take a look at them to make sure that everything looks good. If everything looks good, you're fine. If there's a hole in that documentation, then there's a potential issue. Yes, ma'am.
So you were saying that you could refinance after you do your 1031 exchange. So if you did that and took $50,000 out, then you'd just be responsible to pay taxes on the $50,000?
Well, if you close on that property and on the same day of closing you receive $50,000 of cash, that's going to be taxable to you. But if you close on that property and then you have a time buffer, a few months, few years, and you have a legitimate business reason for pulling that money out through a refinance, then the general rule is that you're not going to pay taxes on that. So refinancing after the 1031 is generally okay as long as you have a time buffer between the time that you purchased the property and the time of the refi, and you have a legitimate business reason for pulling that money out. Like you pulled it out so that you could buy another piece of property, or you pulled it out, or you did the refinance because interest rates went down and you were able to get a better loan, or you pulled the money out through a refi because you needed to use it to improve the property, to make it better for your rental. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right.
All right, we'd like to thank Mark Bullock. Once again, he's with First American Exchange. And I just want to do another plug. When I'm sitting with my clients or in my office or over the phone and I need 1031 services, I just have so much confidence in Mark. I just trust them when I introduce our clients to Mark and his team, and they've just done such a fabulous job. Like I said, no complaints from any of my clients that have used them, and he's just done a great job. So we really appreciate Mark spending some time with us. Appreciate you coming down. Let's give Mark a round of applause. All right, to finish up tonight, we're going to have Brandon Grange. He's our acquisitions director. He oversees all of our markets and our teams in each of our markets. And I think in our last intensive in January, we didn't have too much time to go over Memphis as far as a market update. And so Brandon's going to give us a resource and just briefly talk about that. Brandon.
Okay, thanks, Nate. And thanks, Mark. That was really valuable, especially for a lot of us that we have just a lot of our clients that are doing 1031s or preparing to do 1031s from properties they bought in markets in the past and now switching into other markets. So it's really, really helpful. So yeah, as Nate alluded to in our last intensive, we had a pretty deep dive into a number of the markets that we're currently investing in. And just again, as kind of a refresher, the active markets that we're in right now are Indianapolis, Orlando, Charlotte, and Memphis. And we're always looking at other markets as well, but we didn't get a lot of time to spend. We actually had the groups that we were working with in the past, or in each of the markets that we're currently in, we had the teams that are out there. So the brokers that we work with and the rehab teams, basically we kind of call them our partners or regional directors of acquisition that are actually in the markets that put together some videos that just talked about the markets in general. And we didn't have a whole lot of time in the last intensive to really dive into the Memphis market, and so we figured we'd go ahead and do that now. And again, just to talk about introduce this video that we're going to be watching from our partner. His name is Stephen Green. We've worked with him really since 2010. We started doing some properties in Memphis. We kind of put that on hold for a little while as we really dove into the Phoenix and Las Vegas markets that were so hot for us from about late 2010 to about 2013, 2014. And at that point, 2013 and 14, we started to look we had a lot of requests from a number of our clients that were looking for higher cash flowing markets. So in Phoenix and Vegas, the rent levels, the cash flows that were coming in after the mortgage payments that were done were quite a bit lower. They were just, the cap rates on them that were pretty low, so the actual return on those was coming in pretty low. We had clients that were doing fantastic in the appreciation side. So when they were selling out of those properties, they were making quite a bit of money. But we're trying to find a market that would have higher cash flows and weren't so dependent on the appreciation factor like Phoenix and Vegas were. And so Indianapolis and Memphis were those two markets that we jumped into where they were higher on the cash flow level. So Memphis for us has been a great market. Like we said, we've been in there since about end of 2013 is when we first jumped in. We've worked with Stephen Green's group that is gonna be talking that entire time. He is the person that actually goes to the county auctions and buys the properties for us at the county auctions. He also works with a myriad of brokers and agents in the market as well for us to be able to go in and purchase the assets, rehab them to our normal level that we need to do, and then sell them to our clients as finished rent-ready product. So he manages that whole process. He manages the brokers. He also manages the rehab teams. And again, as I talked about, and there he is, Stephen Green. So he's been a really great resource for us, really good guy, good friend of mine. He really knows his stuff, and we figured that we would turn the time over to Stephen and let him talk a little bit more about what we're doing in Memphis. And by the way, when we're done, if there are any questions about anything in the Memphis market, we can spend a little bit of time going over those if you have any when we get done.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Green and I am the Done For You real estate boots on the ground in Memphis, Tennessee. My wife and I are in charge of the Memphis market, and so if you have or plan on purchasing any homes in Memphis or have done in the past or plan to do so in the future, you will have either already met us or will in the future. So wanted to introduce myself today. I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk to you about the Memphis market. For those of you who do not know, Memphis is obviously in Tennessee. It's in the southwest corner of the state. On the west side, it is bordered by the Mississippi River. On the other side of that is the state of Arkansas. On the south side is the state of Mississippi. And so Memphis, unlike a lot of the other major cities that you're probably used to, which have growth kind of going all the way around the city, Memphis, because it's based in the southwest corner of the state, all of the growth happens east because it can't go west, which would be in Arkansas, and it can't go south, which is Mississippi. A little bit goes north, but majority of it goes east, and the areas that we focus in are on the eastern side right before you get into the suburbs. So just a little geography for you as it pertains to Memphis. Memphis is the second largest city in the state of Tennessee. The population of the city is roughly 650,000, actually slightly over that. And then the Memphis and surrounding area, or the MSA, is a little over 1.3 million. Some of the reasons why people or investors choose Memphis is the low cost of living. Memphis's cost of living is roughly 15 to 20% below the national average. So you get a lot of bang for your buck when you invest in the Memphis market. In addition, we have a great price to rent ratio. So not only are you getting a lot of house for the money, but you're also getting a lot of rent for the low price of the home, which then translates into cash flow, which is awesome for you investors out there. And one of the reasons why this occurs in Memphis is because roughly half of the population rents in the city. And so you have homes and you're able to buy them for a really good price, and then you have a lot of competition on the rental side of them, and which again translates into some good cash flow. So some positives there. The average home price in Memphis is just over $170,000. And for those of you that have already bought, that really does get you a lot of house. Typically a brick, 3-bed, 2-bathroom house, newer roof, covered parking, and one that will rent for a good amount. So we've had good success in Memphis, and we think that we will continue to have some great success in the city. Some of the other positive things about the city that I want to talk to you guys about is kind of why Memphis. One of the main drivers in Memphis, economic drivers, is distribution. Memphis is kind of known as America's distribution center. And one of the things that we say in Memphis is that Memphis has the 4 R's, which is road, rail, runway, and river. So it has the 4 R's, which makes it a great spot for distribution. I'm going to go through a little bit of that with you. Number one would be number one will be runway, which is airport. So Memphis's airport has for 23 years in a row been the busiest airport in terms of volume in the entire country, 23 years in a row. Reasons for that would be FedEx is obviously headquartered here, so you have a massive amount of planes coming and going every single day from Memphis. You also have a major hub with UPS, and so a lot of planes coming in, not necessarily passenger, but a lot of distribution type flights coming in and leaving the city of Memphis. It's the second busiest airport in the world behind Hong Kong, and so a lot of packages coming and going through the city of Memphis, which also translates into jobs. You also have runway. So rail. Sorry, the 4 R's get confusing. You also have rail. So we have the ability to reach 45 states within 48 hours from Memphis, which makes it a great spot to set up when you're a rail company. We're also one of only 4 cities in the entire country with 5 Class 1 rail companies, rail systems, and then we're the 3rd largest rail city in the country behind Chicago and St. Louis. We're served by Union Pacific, BNSF, which just did over the past couple of years a $200 million improvement to their facility. We have Norfolk Southern, Canadian, National, and CSX Corporation. So served by all 5, and only one of 4 cities in the entire country that has all 5 rail companies located. On the road, we serve 152 markets through overnight truck service, and that's the most in the entire country. So Memphis serves more cities or locations with overnight trucking than any other city in the entire country. So pretty big deal there. And then on the riverside, we're the 5th largest inland port in the country. So a lot of goods coming and going through the Memphis port, actually more than the New Orleans port, surprisingly. So all of this translates into jobs, which is a good thing for people wanting to live in the city, renting or buying. So some good stuff there. Also on the distribution side, just a couple of big names that have big presence on distribution. One would be FedEx, of course. You also have Target. Nike has over almost 5 million square feet of distribution facility here in the city of Memphis. And Williams-Sonoma has almost 3 million square feet of distribution warehouse space in the city of Memphis. So just a couple, and then Ford Motor Company as well has over 1 million. So just a couple of the big names that have distribution centers or facilities in the city of Memphis. It is a main economic driver for the city. In addition to distribution would be healthcare. Memphis is the 2nd largest ortho device manufacturing city in the country. We have Wright Medical, Smith & Nephew, Medtronic, just to name a few. So a lot of orthopedic parts are manufactured in Memphis, and then you have the distribution center that can then ship them out to the rest of the country. So you have orthopedic. You also have St. Jude Children's Hospital, which is the number 4 hospital in the country for children's cancer research, according to a 2016 study. We also have ALSAC, which is their fundraising arm, and that's the 5th largest healthcare charity in the country. And healthcare, or St. Jude, employs roughly 3,200 doctors, researchers, fellows, staff workers. So it's a pretty big operation going on in the city. Most of everyone that we talk to have heard of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. You also have Baptist Hospitals, which has 6 different hospitals around the Memphis area. Methodist has 7 different hospitals around the Memphis area, including Le Bonheur Children's Research Hospital. And then University of Tennessee, the state school, their medical school is located in the city of Memphis as well. So healthcare, another big economic driver in Memphis. Some of the major headquarters that are located in Memphis, because they also have seen the value either with location as it pertains to distribution and getting goods sent out, or the cost of living and being able to find a place that is affordable for not only the headquarters to be located in for the company expenses, but also for their employees, a place where their employees can move to and afford a quality home and way of life. And some of the major headquarters, just to name a few: FedEx, AutoZone is based here, International Paper is based here, ServiceMaster, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, which I already named, Medtronic's spine headquarters is based here, Wright Medical, Hunter Fan, Ducks Unlimited. So just a couple of the bigger companies. Mid-America Apartments, which is a REIT, a publicly traded REIT, they're based in Memphis as well. So some big headquarters located here. They've seen the value in Memphis as well. So some of the positive things that have happened this previous year has been ServiceMaster has moved to downtown, their headquarters has, and they made a pretty significant investment into the city of Memphis, which resulted in roughly 1,200 new jobs being created. So that was positive. Evergreen Packaging also invested some money, moved their headquarters in Memphis. Sedgwick Claims Management was moving their headquarters into a different location. They were already in Memphis, but moving locations and also adding a little over 200 new jobs in the Memphis market. IKEA came to Memphis. IKEA is the first IKEA in the state of Tennessee, so it was a big win for Memphis, a big deal. I know some people have had IKEA for years and years. It was a big deal because the only IKEA around us was either in Atlanta, which is about a 6 to 7 hour drive, and St. Louis, which is about 5 or 6 hours. So Memphis, first IKEA in the state of Tennessee. There's no IKEA in the state of Kentucky. There's no IKEA in the state of Mississippi, and there's not one in Arkansas either. So that's bringing, funny enough, a lot of people coming to Memphis just to visit the IKEA. You also had St. Jude made a massive announcement at the beginning of 2017 saying that they were going to expand the Pinch District, which is the northern part of downtown Memphis where St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is. They're going to do a $7 billion expansion over several years, which is going to add roughly 1,800 jobs over that time period. So a huge expansion happening with St. Jude, which will bring a lot of positive, high-paying jobs to the city of Memphis as well. So some great things. And what else is planned for in the near future? Amazon announced that they're bringing a fulfillment center to the city of Memphis on the south side near Shelby Drive, which is on the south side of town. That's going to add over 600 jobs. Cargill is adding an animal protein production plant, which is going to add almost 200 new jobs to the city of Memphis. And then St. Jude, as I mentioned, is doing the expansion, and that is going to be adding jobs, again, over the next several years, but quite a few jobs coming to Memphis. So some positive momentum coming into 2018. We feel like that prices, in terms of home prices, for the next several years are going to rise. We're feeling 8%. We're estimating 8% over the next 3 years. So that may look like 4%, 2 and 2, or maybe 3 and 2. But a steady growth, I think, in terms of appreciation. We think that rents are going to rise roughly 8% over the next couple of years. Things have been improving in Memphis on the housing market, and we think that that's going to continue forward. The average home price, again, was higher, 5% higher than the previous year. So prices went up from 2016 to 2017, 5%. Bank sales were down this past year by 35%, and traditional sales were up by about 10%. So again, pendulum swinging in the right direction. And I said earlier, I mistakenly said rent prices are going to rise 8% over the next couple of years. We feel like home prices are actually going to rise 3 to 5% for each of the next 3 years. So we think 3 to 5% for each of the next 3 years in terms of home prices. So again, a great place to invest. We hope that you will look at Memphis when you're thinking about places to put your dollars in terms of buying an investment property that is going to produce some cash flow. We think of Memphis as kind of your dividend stock play. It's a good cash flow market that's going to be paying, and then with the time that you're investing, you're also going to be getting some positive appreciation. So it's a win-win, and we hope to meet you guys soon. Thanks so much. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, there's Stephen Green. So as he was saying, a lot of exciting stuff's going on in Memphis. It's been a fantastic market for us for a number of years. As he kind of mentioned, we haven't had a lot of people sell houses in Memphis quite yet. Most of the people, when they're buying on those cash flow markets, are really looking for really long-term holds. But we have had situations where people, for one reason or another, have had to liquidate that asset and go into something else. And we have been, really impressed with the appreciation that has been happening, for the people that bought in 2014, 2015, and had to sell their properties now. So it really has kind of, on our pro formas, for the most part, we had kind of a 3% appreciation factor that we kind of factored in on those, and it turns out that we were really off by quite a bit. We've kind of bumped that up to about 5%, and a lot of people have even been exceeding that. So we never recommend for people to buy in our cash flow markets to buy simply for appreciation. We've set these markets up to be more of a long-term buy and hold type of strategy, but it is a nice bonus, when you're hitting those kind of, over 5% type of appreciation numbers in a market like that. So with that said, that's about it for the intensive tonight. We're probably going to get out a little bit early. Does anybody have any questions on the Memphis market or anything else that we may have covered today, 1031s? We don't have Mark anymore, but we have some other guys. If anyone's got some questions you want to go through. I don't know if we're able to even see any online that might come through, but we're good? Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. We look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks.